this morning. We've been continuing in our study of Mark, and it's, I think back a few weeks, and we've been talking. It all started off with the crazy story of the dead, the demon-possessed man and the pigs and all these things. And it started off with the challenge that I gave all of us, and the challenge that Christ was giving us through the passage, saying, hey, look, I'm in the business of making the unclean clean, and I've asked you to invest your time, your resources to join me in this walk, whether it's in our own lives or in the lives of other people. And so we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and last week we talked about one of the things that come in the way of us trying to be a part of what Jesus is doing is the ability to give up our own sense of control. That desire to be on top of things, the desire to know exactly what I want and when I want it and things like that. And we talked about the struggles with that and the obstacles of the challenges of giving up our own sense of control. And this morning, I want to push us a little bit further and say, look, when we try to join Jesus in this business of making the things that are unclean clean, there are more than just giving up control. There are other things that come in the way. And this morning I want to talk about the fun topic of pride and jealousy. And I know you've hoped coming this morning that I would address this issue and that you've been dying all week to hear me preach on pride and jealousy. But I think this is a very important topic just because I think it goes overlooked often. Okay? And the reason that I say this is this. We talked last week about how there are certain kinds of sin that comes compartmentalized. Certain things are bigger, certain things are not so big of a deal. And I think pride and jealousy fall into that category, okay? It's when somebody says to you, hey, I struggle with pride, or pride is something that is like a thorn in my side. Not many of us, when we hear that, when someone comes up to us and they say, hey, you struggle with pride, oh my gosh, how could you? That's disgusting. It's not something that we would respond in that way. Whereas if I were to come to someone and say, hey, I struggle with murder, right? Or I struggle with grand theft auto, or something grand like that. People will come up to me like, wow, that really is serious. But if I were to go to a close friend of mine, or even somebody that I look to get some advice or mentorship, and I say, hey, I really struggle with pride, it's not something that we really often consider as that big of a deal. And I think that's why it kind of goes overlooked, and so many of us might struggle with this issue because we don't really address it as much. This morning, I want to call our attention to how actually big of a deal it really is, because at the base of what pride is, okay, at the very foundation of what pride is, it's basically saying that what is pride? Pride is when you draw attention to yourself and away from God. Okay? When you're saying that I is who I am, me is more important than anything else, and in our particular sense as believers, as we say that God is the one that we worship and God is the one that we follow, it's saying that, look, I'm going to take all the attention that is due God and place it on my own life. And so my opinions, my views, my thoughts, my ways are greater than the ways of God. Now this is the base of pride. And so we ask, that doesn't seem that big of a deal, but look at what it says in Proverbs 16:5. Okay, and this is very direct language, almost to the point where I don't even have to explain it. It says, the Lord detests all the proud of heart. Be sure of this, they will not go unpunished. I don't know about you, but this is very strong language. Okay? The word detests actually means that God cannot stand, that God cannot tolerate the proud of heart. Be sure of this, they will not go unpunished. Now, when I read this, and pride is something that I struggle with often, okay, it needs to be something, this concept of pride, drawing attention to myself rather than giving all glory to God. This act of being prideful needs to be something that we need to be very aware of and we need to take very seriously, because God himself says, look, it's something that detests who he is. It's detested by God. And so this morning we're going to look at that. We're going to look at how pride works and why it is exactly that God is so horrified, mortified about this, and how it is that we're supposed to deal with it. Because why? When we leave pride unchecked, there are a lot of things that are combined with it. And this morning I want to talk about pride leading to jealousy as well. Okay, so that's kind of the basis of what we're going to talk about. When we look at our story this morning, remember last week, if you recall, Jesus is going around and he's, he healed that woman that was bleeding for 12 years, and then he goes to this person's house, the ruler, Jairus' only daughter. He goes to his house, and the daughter's dead, and he's like, oh, Jesus, don't even worry about coming. And Jesus says, have faith. And then Jesus just says to the little girl, hey, wake up, arise. And this girl just rises up, okay? And there's this crazy story of God's faith and God's control and God's power. And then he leaves that place, and he goes to his hometown accompanied by his disciples. And as Jesus was accustomed to doing on the Sabbath, so on Sunday morning or on the day that we're all gathered here like this, he goes to the synagogue and he does what he does best. He goes around and he's teaching. He's preaching, he's telling people stories, he's explaining the scriptures to them, and he's doing what we're doing this morning. He's teaching them in the synagogues. And look, in verse 2, when he began to teach in the synagogue, many who heard him were amazed. Now this word amazed in the original language, it doesn't mean that they were astonished, but it better, would translate or be better used as the word shocked. They were shocked by what Jesus was saying. Okay? Jesus is teaching and he's preaching, and they're shocked. They're astonished. They're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he just said that. And then look at the response. They're shocked, and then they say, where did this man get these things? Who does this man think he is more accurate the way that these people are saying? Who does this man think he is? Where does he get the confidence? Who does he think that he dares to say these types of things? What's this wisdom that's been given to him? And what are these remarkable miracles he's performing? And then he says, isn't he just a carpenter? Isn't he Mary's son? Aren't his sisters around? Isn't he just part of us, like regular people? Who does he think he is to say these things? And then look at the very bottom, it says, and they took offense at him. See, this word offense is interesting because it defines like this. The word offense meaning the action causes a person to begin to distrust and desert the one whom they ought to trust and obey. That's what it means when they took offense, that they started to distrust and to desert the person that they actually should trust and obey. And so when they hear something that shocks them, their response, the people around them, is, wow, who does this guy think he is? And they begin to distrust Jesus. And it doesn't say exactly in Mark. Mark doesn't really tell us what it is that Jesus was saying. But if I were to be consistent thus far in our study of Mark into what Jesus has been saying in the synagogues, I assume that he'd be saying something like this. He would have been teaching something like, hey, if you want to be my disciples, then you all have to give up everything you own and follow me. If someone comes to you and he slaps you on your right cheek, then give him your left cheek. If somebody said, I need help and I'm cold, don't just give him your jacket, but give him your inner clothes as well. When somebody says, I'm hungry, don't just give him a piece of bread. Invite him to your house. Bring him into your home. Live with them. Love them. You see, Jesus is saying the same things over and over again that we see in Mark 6, and it shocks them because they're like, wait, this is not normal. And when they're performing these miracles, okay, when Jesus is performing these miracles, they're not amazed at the fact that Jesus is performing miracles, but they're amazed and shocked at the way that Jesus is performing these miracles. Remember last week we were talking about the woman that's been bleeding for 12 years? The implications of what it means to be bleeding in the Israelite society is what? That you're unclean. Now, most of the times when healing rituals and things like that would happen, these priests, they would go near in a place of prayer, but they would never place their hands on a person that is unclean. You notice in every instance that Jesus heals or any sort of miracle that Jesus performs, he is placing his hand on the leper. He is placing his hand on the person that is unclean. The way that Jesus is performing these miracles is shocking to the people. And so they're like, what is going on with this person? Not only is he preaching all these crazy things like, hey, if you really want to be my disciple, you have to sell everything, give up everything, just deny yourself, suffer, and be my disciple. And then he says, look, I'll show you what it means to love one another. You touch people. He touches people that are unclean, and they're shocked. They're totally taken back at what's going on. And so, at the base of what's going on here is that many of them, when they listen to Jesus preach, when they listen to, or when they see Jesus performing miracles, they're disagreeing with Jesus, right? They're saying, Jesus, really? If I have to be your disciple and you say you're the Son of God, and for me to get into eternal life, I have to be like you, it means I have to give up everything? Like he says to the rich young ruler, hey, sell all that you have and come follow. Jesus, I don't know. I kind of agree, but I don't know if I totally agree with you. Well, let me take another one that a lot of people really rubs them the wrong way, okay? It's the passage that I hear all the time where they talks about women being submissive to the husband, right? When Paul is talking about that and he's saying, hey, wives, be submissive to your husbands as the church is submissive to Christ. And husbands, die for your wife as the church would die. I mean, we hear these things, and women, especially, depending on where you are, and especially here, where we have a lot of women power, women pride, we have these people all of a sudden, even without understanding, they're like, wait a minute, what? Women submissive to man? Jesus, this is the 21st century. Things don't make a lot of sense. And so, you see, they're disagreeing, and we may think, okay, well, Jesus, what you're saying isn't that big of a deal, but when you bring it down to our level, it is. Because if we take it for what it is, and we take it the way that Jesus is saying, hey, look, really, if you want to be my disciple, you have to give up everything, you have to suffer, you have to struggle, you have to be persecuted. And then many of us instinctively, and I'm like that too, I'm like thinking, Jesus, is that what you really meant? Because I don't know if I really fully agree with what you're saying. And I think that's the basis of what God is asking us this morning. It's not when you agree with God, He's asking you, hey, is there pride in your life where you're trying to say, I know better than God? It's when you disagree with God, how do you respond? When God says something, when you read the scriptures and you hear something that's different than how you want to hear, or different how I want to hear,